It's actually a pleasure to be here and to share with you. I think our work with MAPS and the meetings that I had with Eric starting about 3 years ago at the American Psychiatric Association really helped develop the idea that we needed to move not just to make MDMA into a medicine for the FDA, but also through Europe and through the European Medicines Agency. And then once we were able to do that, then we could move more easily to around the world. And so that's what we're currently doing. MAPS I started in 1986. And since then, we've raised about $70 million in donations, which is pretty amazing. When I started adding it up, I was pretty shocked. So what that means is that there's a lot of people that really do care about research into this area and don't need to do it in an investment context, that they are willing to give their money away to see these psychedelics made into medicines for a whole wide variety of reasons. One of them I'd like to start by just acknowledging my mentor and teacher, Stan Grof, who's from the Czech Republic. He came to the United States in 1968 after the Russians moved in, and he started working at Johns Hopkins. And so what he said is that psychedelics are to the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy. And the more that I have studied psychedelics and the more I've learned about that, the more I think it's really true that there's this sort of barrier between the conscious and the unconscious mind, that we all experience this movement in every night in our dreams, whether we remember them or not. And that psychedelics have been used for thousands of years for this purpose. And so it's a reliable way to bring things up to our awareness, both sort of unconscious things that we haven't really thought about or felt about, and also things that we've suppressed. And in particular, also this opportunity to have this spiritual sense of connection. So Stan was able to develop and keep going with this research once the psychedelics were criminalized about 50 years ago, and that's what he developed holotropic breathwork, which is a way through hyperventilation to produce very similar states that you can get through psychedelics. And while it's more work to do it that way and more difficult because you have to kind of voluntarily reduce your defenses, what it suggests and what it demonstrates, I think, is that what we experience under the influence of psychedelics are not psychedelic experiences, they're human experiences, and that there's other ways to get to them without the drugs. And that sort of validates for me the importance of the experiences that we get from psychedelics, but also the whole process of integration. Because while we're going to talk about psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, it's fundamentally different than what pharmaceutical companies often try to do, which is to say, here's a drug to help you correct a biochemical deficit or do something like that. What we're trying to do is, through some very deep, intense experiences with support in a safe context, is help people not need drugs. So that you could say that even psychedelic psychotherapy is aiming at a non-drug approach. It's using drugs to bring people into certain kind of experiences to help them so that they could be free of drugs. And I think that's something easier for us to say in a way, because we're doing this in a nonprofit context. It's not about trying to sell drugs. It's about really trying to cure suffering in different ways. And the work that we're focused on right now primarily is MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Bastians for really being the first person in the world to start using psychedelics for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so this book, Shaviti, is by an Israeli Holocaust writer who was actually one of Bastian's patients. And so this book is about several of his LSD experiences. And my family in Israel knew the author of this and knew him before and after, and said that it helped him a lot, but when he came back he was still troubled, which you could understand just from what he had to go through. But also, there's a way in which, if you were to read this book that, and learn more also about Dr. Bastian's work, that LSD does bring things up to the surface, but it doesn't have a fear reduction effect. And so people can sometimes get really stuck and it's very painful. Whereas MDMA brings things up to the surface in a more gentle way. So what we're about is making MDMA into a medicine. And this is becoming more and more accepted. The world is learning more about it. We've come quite a distance, but what just happened yesterday was we published a paper in Psychopharmacology that is a review of all of our phase 2 studies. And so I just wanted to point out that if any of you want to go read that it's open access, so we paid to have it be open access. And the conclusions were that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy was efficacious and well tolerated in a large sample of adults with PTSD. The study supported expansion into phase 3 trials and led to FDA granting breakthrough therapy designation for this promising treatment. And so we were able also to take this same research that we presented to FDA and also presented to the European Medicines Agency. And so they agreed with the FDA, and we've been given permission by EMA also to move forward into phase 3. So while I was sitting in the back and listening to Dutch and trying to figure out what was being said, I also was checking my email. And so I found that there's a review, it's called PsyPost. It's for people who are interested in sort of latest developments in psychology. And today's one, very today, was the first one, about 6 or 7 entries, was this. It was about another paper that we just published that was a qualitative study, not the kind of study that FDA will use the data from to make drugs into a medicine, but still very, very important. And what the qualitative study demonstrated that there's a series of other benefits in addition to the reduction of PTSD symptoms. And so what they particularly highlighted in this paper is many of the participants said the therapy led to improvement in self-awareness, social functioning. I think this is really important. It motivated them to try new things and reduce the use of both prescription medication and illicit substances. So by new things, what they meant was new therapies and new approaches to treatment, so that people who have trauma are really, it's difficult to bring them into therapy because the memories that they deal with are so painful. But if you learn a way to process it, then you're willing to continue doing the work even after the drug is no longer being administered. They also expressed being more open to other treatment options and that they had very little motivation before that. So the people that are in our studies are all treatment resistant. So we have chronic, severe treatment-resistant people. So we felt because of sort of the political dynamics of the way ecstasy is seen as a party drug and the way governments of the world have criminalized that in order to take this drug that was actually a therapy drug before it became a party drug, but to bring it back, we needed to work with the hardest cases. We needed to show that it would work where nothing else was working. And so that's why we work with people who were treatment resistant and mostly given up hope for other treatments. And the way that we're doing this, just to say who we is, so for the long time, most of the 33 years that MAPS has been in existence, I was unaware of a program that actually President Reagan had signed into law that was creating incentives for developing drugs that are off patent. And those incentives are called data exclusivity. So what that means is that if you're the first to make a drug into a medicine, even if it's off patent, nobody can use your data for a certain number of years to argue to sell it for generic purposes. So that meant that I've been able to tell a different kind of a story to our donors. And I said that like most nonprofits, if you're feeding the hungry or trying to house the homeless or take care of people, take care of refugees or take care of people after disasters, that it's an unending need. There's always going to be a continual need for it, and you're going to need continual new donations. But MAPS is one of the rare nonprofits that is actually trying to get a product out the other end. And that product then, because of this data exclusivity, means that we could actually sell it for a profit and then use those profits for more research. So what I've been able to tell donors is if you help us make MDMA into a medicine, then we'll be able to fund some or all of further research through the sale of MDMA. But I'm very concerned about the profit motive when it comes to healthcare. And I think that distorts incentives in really bad ways. And that's why we have America that has highest healthcare costs, but the outcomes are not very good on average. So we've created a new way to market drugs through what's called the Public Benefit Corporation, which is a modification of capitalism, so that you don't maximize profits, you maximize public benefit. But it is for profit and you do pay taxes on the income. So what we've done is MAPS has then created this public benefit corporation that would be 100% owned by MAPS, and that people make donations to MAPS, MAPS invests in the benefit corp. And then the benefit corp will do the research and then sell the Mdma, and then whatever profits we make go back to further research. And MAPS Europe will be similarly 100% owned by MAPS, and that's what the vehicle that we'll use here in Europe. So we started, for the first 7 years, I was the only staff person at MAPS. But now we're over 55 people, and we're divided, as I said, in these two groups, MAPS, the nonprofit, and then the benefit corp. And so in the nonprofit, we have the executive team, our fundraising team, communications, media relations, operations. The Zendo Project is psychedelic harm reduction at festivals to try to demonstrate that even though people can get into trouble taking these drugs in recreational settings, there's ways to help those people process the emotions so that they don't become casualties and then more social arguments for not making these drugs into medicines. And then we have a small advocacy team. So that's MAPS, and then the clinical research team, which is growing so fast everybody's not even on this, is led by a group of women who used to work at Novartis. And so we call them our refugees from Big Pharma. And so they're more interested in helping us. They volunteered, and then eventually the work just kept getting bigger and bigger, and so now we pay them. And then they brought in a lot of their associates. So this is in addition to the principal investigators of our different sites. And also we've trained over 80 therapists for the US, for the phase 3 projects in the US. And then we've started the training also for the European therapists. And now what we're doing is we're training people for what's called expanded access, which is compassionate use, which can run concurrent with the phase 3 study. So we're now training roughly 50 people every 2 months in one big part of our training program. There's other parts that they have to go, and we're going to be expanding the training program as well. And so this is just to show some of the cohorts that we have trainings all over the world. This was the one that we've seen pictured before from Thailand. And then in order to do the research, we had to satisfy the FDA that we standardized the therapy. So, we can standardize the drug, that's not that hard. Just measure it out, this is the standard dose people get, but standardizing the therapy. So we had to develop a treatment manual that described what is our therapeutic approach. And the essence of this therapeutic approach came from the early work with psychedelics, with LSD, and with psilocybin, developed by Stanislav Grof and others. And it's based on this sort of assumption that that the mind has a self-healing property the same way that the body does. So we all know that our body heals itself, and that we don't know how that it's not under our conscious control, but the body heals itself. And so when you take a psychedelic like LSD, that Stan has called this non-specific amplifier of the unconscious, it's unpredictable what's going to come up, what people are going to think about, what emotions are going to come up. And so many of the psychotherapies have very scripted, directed kind of procedures, like prolonged exposure or cognitive behavioral therapy. But our approach is based on a different kind of concept, which is that those elements of cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, prolonged exposure can occur during an MDMA therapy session, but not in any particular order. So we believe there's this inner healing intelligence, or we operate under this theory that once you give somebody a psychedelic and you create a therapeutic context where they're able to really focus internally on what's happening, that the order of which things emerge is some inner wisdom, which we don't know what it is, but we will encourage people to experience it, whether it comes initially as a thought, as a feeling, as a bodily sensation, whatever it happens to be. Our goal is to really encourage that. And so we have 8-hour therapy sessions with a male-female co-therapy team. And so there's enough time to kind of wait and just watch how things go. And we do believe that it's essential for people at some point to talk about their trauma and to really express their feelings about it. and in a safe way. But there's no particular order of when that happens, and we see all different kind of orders. So some people going directly to the trauma, some people going to happy memories that give them strength, some people going to traumas from childhood or other traumas that are different than the ones that they've even spoken to the therapist about, or that they've even thought about themselves for a long time. So we've manualized the therapy. We've developed also what are called adherence criteria. So we have a bunch of adherence raters that we've trained that review videotapes of the therapy and then give feedback to the therapist on how well they're adhering to the manual. And so we have sort of core competencies, this verbal communication, establishing rapport, communicating safety and support, eliciting pertinent information, addressing questions and concerns, being empathic, and really supporting the inner-directed approach. And the other key part of this that is so important has to do with the power dynamics between therapists and patients. So our other core belief is that all we're really doing is helping people heal themselves. And that it's not so much what the therapists are doing to them, but it's the therapist creating this safe, supportive, educated context for people to confront their own demons, to experience what's been difficult for them to experience. So that's different in some ways than shamanism, when we think a lot of times about shamanism that where they've used different kind of psychoactive psychedelic drugs. A lot of times the shaman is the healer, he's the power person in the culture. Sometimes even the shaman takes the drug and the person doesn't, and they'll sort of do various different things to try to heal the person. But our view is that we really need to help people become self-healing and to empower them to realize that they're able to do that, because life is going to be presenting people with a series of challenges throughout their whole lives. And so maybe you help somebody get out of a particular trauma that they had from war or from an accident or any number of different things, but their life is going to continue and they're going to have a whole series of other challenges. And if you have helped them to learn how to heal themselves, then you really had a much bigger, longer-term impact than just being the power person that heals somebody. So that's another part of this inner-directed healing. The treatment manual is like we're really putting it back on the individual to take the courage to feel the difficult feelings and then to try to integrate that and move on. And so the way in which we train therapists has been basically left up to us by the FDA and the EMA. And they've also left up to us to sponsor what the therapy actually is. So the first part is this online course, 14 hours. Then we have this week-long training that I've said we are doing 50 people every 2 months. Part C is this experiential elective. And so what that means is that we have obtained approval from the FDA to give them to therapists as part of their training. And so we feel that you wouldn't go to a meditation teacher that didn't meditate, or a yoga teacher that didn't do yoga, or most people would be very uncomfortable going to a therapist that has never been to their own therapy. So we felt that it's really essential to mainstream the therapeutic use of MDMA to create opportunities to really educate therapists so that they'll be the most effective that they can be, so that they'll know what their patients are going through. But we don't feel that it should be required. We feel it should be optional. We don't think we should require anybody to do a drug if they don't want to. Plus, we also want to welcome skeptics and people who want to come into our program but for whatever reason don't want to take the MDMA. And in that case, we ask them to be part of the team that is administering MDMA to other new therapists that are training. So one way or another, they will see what's happening. If they don't want to take it themselves, they don't have to. So I think that's really important, that be optional. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do here with Eric and his team, is to create a center in the Netherlands where we'll run training for European therapists. And they'll be able to come here for these trainings and also for these MDMA experiences. And then we do role play, again on videotape. We give people different scenarios, and then we have our therapy training team watch the videotapes and then give back feedback. But then the final step is we have each therapy team work with one PTSD patient under supervision. And then our team, again, watches those videotapes and give feedback, because we don't think that people should really start working on a controlled study until they've actually had practice, and we've given them feedback working with one PTSD patient using the exact same protocol that we'll use in phase 3, but without the whole placebo arm. So in this open label study that we use for evaluation and supervision, there's no control group. Everybody knows that they're all getting MDMA. And so that's where also the FDA and EMA said they won't count that data towards the approval because there is no double blind. But that's the final step. And we do have diplomas and stuff that we're giving. We think that patients should be, this is just the one we made for a TV show. They asked us to illustrate in a therapist's office that was doing psychedelic therapy, some sort of certificate. So, but we do think that patients should be able to know if their therapists have ever done the drug that they're being given. And so we have this diploma for the people that have not elected to do the drug, and then this one for the people that have chosen to take the MDMA. So I think that's enough of a background. What I'd like to do now is go directly to a 10-minute videotape of one of the veterans that was in our study. And this is snippets of his therapy. And you'll see how the therapists interact with him, how the patient responds to the MDMA. And this particular person was dealing with rage. So after he got back from Iraq, he would explode with rage, he would throw things. He never actually beat up his wife, but he said that he made her cry. He threw things at her, or not at her, but near her, and he just felt like he couldn't control his anger, that he had this, and I'm not sure how you all think of this, but he had this training to go to war, but he didn't have enough training to come back from war. And so when he came back, he just couldn't manage all these problematic emotions. There's also been a book called Acid Test, LSD, Ecstasy, and the Power to Heal, that was written about our work. And this fellow, Nicholas Blackston, is the veteran that's profiled in that book. So if you did want to learn more about his story, you could read Acid Test.
Are you ready to take your capsule?
Sure. Now, we actually don't ever hand somebody the capsule. That's also part of empowering people. We put it, they have to actually take it. That very first step where they have to choose to do it.
I was trying to tell you, I had this this really intense feeling come over my body, and my heartbeat started beating real fast, but I didn't get it. At first, I started feeling a little afraid, but then once I started breathing, I never felt that before. I really felt my heartbeat start to slow down and everything. When I started breathing, just relax and sensation. And it was amazing how not quickly it went away, but just how in control I felt of making it go away. So usually I've had those feelings. In a way, it kind of felt like when a panic attack kind of comes on, and my heartbeat started, and I felt my whole body flush, get really hot, and then I was just amazed how I was able to not really fight it, but kind of relax. I'm not thinking about it now. I've blown up myself. I don't want to see it completely different now. Thinking about it, I really, that moment that I got blown up, when it was happening, and everything was moving so slow, my mind was just racing at the speed of light. I can really go back and visualize it. I've never been able to visualize it so hard before. I can really feel what it was like, and there was this.
So people's memories are enhanced for the trauma under MDMA because the fear part of it is reduced. Sorry, it's so hard to hear.
I just feel like sometimes just really amazing. It's hard to put it in words, but that aspect of me that's just really rageful, and also, besides that image I told y'all about, of, the fighting with them, I had this image of it, like, in a jail cell. I had that part of me is locked up in jail, and it's just, it's dark, but it's got, bright red eyes, and just really evil. And I thought that, and I felt like I felt like I put that person there, and I went to it and just opened the door.
That's the blood pressure machine.
Hugged that person, and then the eyes just faded away, and no longer had kind of an evil look to it itself, and I visualized both of us just taking apart the jail cell and just, really becoming friends. And then I visualized that image I told you about of me, it coming out of my hips and stabbing me inside and everything. I just had a strong visualization of me, reaching up where the knife was on my side and taking it out, and I took my hands off of its neck and didn't choke it anymore, and just really embraced it, and I don't know, I feel part of me realized that I think that I was taking that person and keeping him locked up because I was so afraid of him, and then that by putting him in that cell and keeping him locked up, that I was just making it worse for him. And that was really more beneficial if we kind of worked together. And I never realized how much I thought I was being a peaceful person, but I didn't realize how much I was punishing that aspect of me. I think maybe in Iraq I saw what it was capable of, and I think I was too afraid to, and a part of me just feels so bad that I did that to him. I mean, I know it's me, but I just describe it wisely.
Part of you.
I don't know, I just got this amazing sense of just, I guess, wisdom. I really don't know.
Sounds a lot like wisdom to me.
It was really amazing. You try and think of a really rageful aspect of me, like I can't even, I know it's there, it just doesn't, I really feel like so much more at peace with everything.
Great.
Even if I try to think about Iraq and everything, like I somehow feel like really peaceful about the fact that that's my journey. And that
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
part of me think, I mean, I know this is part of the, part of the drug, but when I try and think, am I going to be able to hold on to this, this understanding, and this somewhat wisdom, this knowledge that I have now. I just ask myself that question. I feel like it's so profound that I don't think I could really forget it. I don't know why I couldn't have come up with this on my own, but I'm glad I found it.
I'm glad too.
So one of the parts that's pretty amazing about MDMA therapy, here we go, and this was now 10 years ago. So he hasn't forgot it, he hasn't gone back to medication, and he doesn't have PTSD. But this amazing part for me is the way people experience metaphors and imagery and the way in which they are basically telling themselves stories about their lives. And I think we have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of videotapes. So if any PhD students wanted to study some of these videotapes, I think this idea of the metaphorical nature of how people heal and the stories that they tell and the imagery that they use would be really fruitful. And so we would be glad to have all of these tapes analyzed by anybody. So the question is then, how does it work? So we do know a lot about MDMA. MDMA was really sort of reintroduced into therapy in the middle 70s. It sort of emerged out of that and became ecstasy, and then governments all over the world have spent, we estimate now, about $400 million or more on studying MDMA, and mostly on studying the risks of MDMA, a little bit into the mechanisms of action, all of which is in the public domain, and we've been able to summarize that and submit that to FDA and EMA. So if we were actually working with a new drug, we'd never be able to make it into a medicine because we just couldn't afford all the safety studies and everything else, but we have all that now. So what we do know, if you go into Medline actually and put MDMA or ecstasy, there's over 5,000 papers. And we've summarized all of those in what's called an investigator's brochure that's also up on our website that just is a complete summary of the world's scientific literature on MDMA. But what we do know is that PTSD changes people's brains. And so PTSD causes an increase in activity in the amygdala, where we process fear. It causes a decrease in activity in the prefrontal cortex, where people think logically. And then it causes a decrease in activity in the hippocampus, where memories are put into long-term storage. And MDMA also changes people's brains, but in the opposite way. So MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala, permitting these painful emotions and memories to become more conscious and to become processed. And it increases activity in the prefrontal cortex so that we can think more logically and distinguish things that are often triggers for trauma and separate them out, that these are maybe reminders of something that happened, but it's not the thing itself happening again. And also MDMA increases activity and connectivity between the hippocampus and the amygdala to facilitate these traumatic memories moving out of this kind of short-term memory and being stored into long-term memory. MDMA also releases serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and also enhances the release of oxytocin, prolactin, vasopressin, and cortisol in some kind of complex cascade that has pretty unique effects of any drug that we're aware of. There was just a paper published at the end of April in Nature. And this is a group of neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins. And this was a study in mice. But what they demonstrated is that MDMA increases the release of oxytocin, and that it opens up this critical learning period for social reward learning. And they speculated that that was what really underlied the therapeutic alliance, which is enhanced by MDMA, that this oxytocin, feelings of love and bonding and connection, that people who have PTSD have lost the ability to trust a lot of ways. And so this pharmacologically enhances that ability so they can build this alliance with the therapists. The same group of researchers at Johns Hopkins had previously done this study that they published in octopuses. And so from what I've been able to learn about this study, that octopuses and humans diverged evolutionarily about 250 million years ago. And they have a lot of different brains, and octopuses are very intelligent, but they're generally solitary creatures. They do not hang out with other octopuses unless it's mating season. And they do have serotonin signaling genes. They're able to process serotonin, but it's unknown if their social behaviors are impacted by serotonin or not. So the experiment that they did was they have this 3 chambers, and one of these chambers has an octopus in it, in this cage where they can't move. The other one is an inanimate object, and then the octopus in the middle can move wherever they want to. And so under normal conditions, the octopus will spend way more time with the inanimate object than with the other octopus. So it took a little bit of time for them to figure out, but they figured out how much MDMA to put in the water, where they would soak this octopus in this bath of MDMA water for 10 minutes. And then they would put it back in this same contraption and this experimental thing. And so what they then found is that octopuses now, under the influence of MDMA, spend way more time with the other octopus than with the inanimate object. And that is true whether it's, regardless of the genders. If it's a male octopus in the center that can move and a female octopus or a male octopus, it's beyond gender. It's something even deeper than kind of a mating kind of behavior. It's more about pro-social behaviors. So what this suggests is that the effect of MDMA goes so deep into the way our brains are functioned that it's just really deep and profound. And so one of the things that the FDA has required of us actually is that if we are able to demonstrate that MDMA is effective in reducing PTSD symptoms in adults, we are being required then to work with adolescents with trauma, from 12 to 17-year-olds. Right now we can go from 18-year-olds, and we have no upper age, because it's not about age, it's about health, and particularly heart health, but it's really about health. So if we do the work down to the 18-year-olds and that works, we have to go to 12 to 17-year-olds. And then the FDA said if that works, then we have to go down to 7 to 11-year-olds. So there are a lot of traumatized kids. And so you wonder though, and you saw, Nick, how much verbal interaction there is. And so there won't be that much verbal interaction between 7 to 11-year-olds, or even necessarily between 12 to 17-year-olds. But this octopus study suggests that whatever MDMA is doing goes pre-verbal, goes really deep, and it can have these open-hearted, trusting, fear-diminishing kind of effects, even when little kids are not able to articulate it. I mean, that needs to be experimentally demonstrated, but that's what are called the phase 4 studies. So once the drug is approved, the FDA can require us to do certain things, and that's one of them. So, but because of its role in this idea of compassion, connection, neuroscientists at Stanford published this article in Cell, and this was basically a call to action for the world's neuroscientists. And they said the world's population need more compassion and empathy for one another. The study of MDMA provides one small but potentially important step towards reaching that goal. And so I think that that's in part what these neuroscientists at Johns Hopkins are responding to, is trying to figure out how MDMA actually works, and this sense of pro-social behavior, and how does that link to compassion and empathy. But to give you another little perspective on different people that have commented on what MDMA does, this is Brother David Steinle, who is a Roman Catholic monk. He's in his 80s now. And in the early 1980s, when MDMA was still legal, he experimented with half doses of MDMA to facilitate meditation in the monastery. And several of the other monks were doing that, and I felt, on the theme of PhDs, I felt like I had my oral exam one time, because Father Bruno, who was in charge of this whole monastery, one time called me in for a meeting. He said, "What are all my monks doing with this MDMA that they're getting from you?" And I was able to explain what we were doing. And in the end of it, Father Bruno said it was okay, they could continue doing it. But again, it's not like they're doing it all the time. It's the same idea that you do it once or twice and you get to be feeling in a certain way. And then on your own, you can try to recreate that state without the drug. So it's not like drug-assisted meditation so much. It's MDMA, it's one or two experiences that you then know where to aim. This was a rabbi, Zalman Schachter. He said, "You call the Sabbath a delight. MDMA is like the Sabbath at the end of a long week." And so these were also from the early 1980s. So in 1986, after around 500,000 doses of MDMA had been used in therapeutic settings, but also millions had now been used as ecstasy, the DEA criminalized MDMA. We tried to block that and keep the therapeutic use of MDMA still legal. But we were unable to do that. And so in '86 is when I started MAPS as a nonprofit psychedelic pharmaceutical company. And it took a long time to get any progress, to raise the funds, to get the regulatory permission. And so the first study that we were ever able to publish in actual PTSD patients was a study in Spain. And it was 14 years after I started MAPS. And this was heartbreaking because the study was going really well. It was with women survivors of rape. And that we were doing a dose-response safety study, and after about 5 people had been treated, only up to 50 milligrams, we had some really positive media attention in Spain, and that alerted the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority, and they shut the study down. Not for any scientific reasons, but just for political reasons. And that's where I realized then that we really needed to do work also at the FDA, and that if the FDA starts saying yes to things, then governments around the world will also feel more comfortable about saying yes to things. So the very first study that we were able to publish in the US was 2010. And this was, again, mostly women survivors of childhood sexual abuse, with a few veterans in that study. And then we did, in 2012, we did a 3.5-year follow-up and demonstrated that the actual benefits that we had shown in 2010 persisted. And it got even slightly better after 3.5 years. So it's this idea of helping people learning how to heal themselves so that they can process additional traumas that might come up or past traumas that they still need to process. And then recently we published this paper in Lancet Psychiatry. So we felt that one of the big points of phase 2 is you try to figure out how to design phase 3. And the main issues are, what are your patient population? And who does it work with? Who do you exclude? Who do you include? What is your dose? What is your treatment? And so Zoloft and Paxil, the drugs that are approved for PTSD by the FDA, work better in women than in men, and they don't work in war-related PTSD. And so we felt that we'd had a lot of data from working in women. Now we needed to do a study in combat-related PTSD. And so we ended up designing it, though, for first responders. So we said it was for veterans, firefighters, and police officers. We didn't actually know if we would get any firefighters or police officers, but I thought it was important to put out that kind of concept that really it's for everyone. And as it turned out, we did get 1 police officer, 3 firefighters, and 22 veterans. And so all of the data that we then gathered, that took us 30 years to gather, we went to the FDA in November 29, 2016 for what's called an end of phase 2 meeting. And that's where you present all your information about safety and efficacy, and you ask for permission to move to phase 3, to the large-scale studies that will be used to prove safety and efficacy in order to get prescription approval. And so we had this meeting at the FDA. We presented data from 107 people. We had studies in Israel, Canada, the United States, and Switzerland. We had a total of 107 subjects. And one of the key challenges of phase 2 for us, and of methodologically trying scientifically to do research with psychedelics, is how do you deal with the double-blind problem? So it's pretty obvious for most people in most circumstances whether you've got an inactive pill or you've got a psychedelic drug. And how do you then do research like that? So my theory, and this was actually, maybe this is related to my dreams, because my dissertation, I thought part of it was about how to solve the double-blind problem. And so what I realized, or what I thought I solved the problem. And the solution was low doses of the test drug versus full doses of the test drug. That you have therapy plus low doses versus therapy plus full doses, and everybody believes they're getting MDMA, everybody will get MDMA, and the challenge is going to be to find the dose that's large enough so that it causes confusion with the full dose, but not so large that you get a lot of therapeutic benefit, because then you're going to have a hard time showing differences between the two groups. So in our phase 2 studies, we studied all these different amounts of MDMA, placebo, 25, 30, 40, I didn't put in 50, but we did do 50, 75, 100, 125, and 150. And so what we learned in phase 2, unfortunately, for me, is that my dissertation was wrong. I was right in the sense that the lower doses did produce confusion, but we didn't expect, but what we found is that the lower doses made people nervous, made people uncomfortable. Here they were, they had to respond and focus on their trauma, and they got activated by the sort of energetic aspects of MDMA, but they didn't have enough fear reduction. So they still got somewhat better, but they didn't get the same results as if we would have given an inactive placebo. So we learned that these low doses have somewhat of an anti-therapeutic effect, which made it so that when we went to the FDA, we said you can choose blinding, but you're going to make it easier for us to find a difference between the two different groups than if you let us just do inactive placebo with the therapy. And so we led it to the FDA and we said, tell us what you want us to do. And they ended up thinking about it a lot. Bob Temple is sort of the old wise man at the FDA. He's been there since 1972. He's their science policy guy, and he came into these final meetings. And he said that we should use the inactive placebo, but that we needed to do two things, main things to reduce experimental bias. The first being random assignment, which is something we would have done anyway, but the second is a complicated system of independent raters, so that these independent raters who evaluate the systems the symptoms are different from the therapists. First off, we're going to do that anyway, but we had to have now a pool of about 20 raters in the CAPS-5 trained by the Veterans Administration in Boston, and they're randomly assigned to evaluate which particular patient needs to be studied next.
Are you about to rounding up? Because
Yes, yeah.
It's very interesting, but we have a little bit more time.
Yeah, I'm near done. So we learned that we got a good effect size, we had safety, and also the other thing that we learned is that we did these questionnaires about mystical experience. So in the modern psychedelic research, there's a correlation between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. When you're working with addiction, when you're working with cancer patients who are facing death. And so in MDMA, we use the same measures. People actually did get a fair amount of mystical experiences on this questionnaire, but we discovered that there was no real correlation. So I think that's really important, that it's really about going to your traumatic experience while your ego is intact and working through it when your fear is reduced. So I just want to show, so there is some increase in body temperature, but it's not that significant. There's increase in blood pressure, but it returns to normal at the end. There's a bunch of side effects that are mostly minor. We had no attempted suicides, no serious adverse effects, mostly just somewhat of anxiety. We ended up doing neurocognitive tests before and after, several doses of MDMA, because one of the concerns is about MDMA causing neurocognitive consequences. Heavy ecstasy users, if you look at the literature, that's the one supposed functional consequence from long-term heavy ecstasy use, but we showed that pre and post in 2 different of our studies with 2 different raters that there was no effect on neurocognitive performance. So that helped us really realize that we could do this safely. I'll just skip this. This is just about propaganda. We had really good effect sizes. So the main thing that we had was the control group had 23% of people no longer had PTSD at the end of treatment. So 2 months, after the last experimental session, 23% of the people who were chronic, on average severe treatment-resistant PTSD without active MDMA no longer had PTSD. So that's really pretty good in this population. But then if you add MDMA, it goes up to 56%. And this is again 2 months after, but we also do this 1 year follow-up. And so what we were able to show is that at 1 year, 68% of the people no longer had PTSD. So people continue to get better on their own. And it was on the basis of this that the FDA let us go into phase 3, and then we worked with them on designing and coming to agreement on the phase 3 studies, which we were able to do. And then this is the design, and this is where I'll, and one more slide after this I'll end, but this is, so it's about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It's not about the MDMA. So the first is there's 3 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions as preparation once a week for 3 weeks to build the therapeutic alliance, to teach people about MDMA, to help them figure out how to navigate once they're in the space. Then we have this 8-hour MDMA session with the male-female co-therapy team, and then they spend the night in the treatment center so that they rest. Then the very next morning, they come in, the therapists come back, and they have more integrative psychotherapy sessions, and we have 3 of these integrative sessions in the month. And then the next MDMA session is 3 to 5 weeks after the first one. And then we repeat that cycle again. And so it's 3 MDMA sessions with, again, 3 after, and then comes this outcome measures. So what our sense is at this point is that chances are the treatment that will be a standard is going to be only 2 MDMA sessions. We'll have to be looking to see how, on average, the groups do. But we think that for most people, the 2 sessions are going to be sufficient. What we've been able to identify so far is that people who are high on dissociation tend to need more time for therapy. And also, we taper everybody off their psychiatric medicines, so those people that have a longer period of tapering seem to do better as well, particularly off of SSRIs. And so on the basis of all this, the FDA gave us breakthrough therapy. We have now studied 20 out of 200 people in phase 3, and we think by the end of 2021, we'll have it approved in the FDA, and then maybe a year later or so here in Europe. And that's what we're very much looking forward to, working with a lot of you on that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for a very illuminating and stimulating presentation. I'm sorry I had to rush you,
No, it's okay.
but there is a very important football match. It's 9 o'clock. So we need to finish at 9 o'clock sharp. We will finish at 9 o'clock sharp. But I hate to steal the questions away from the room.
Yeah.
So perhaps you are willing to answer some questions
I'd love
after 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
That is, if you're not interested in this football match. So
I'm
those
not
who want
interested.
so those who want to stay after 9 o'clock, we can do a Q&A with
Okay.
Rick. Thank you very much.